The gates of Airovale stretched open as morning spilled across the cobbled streets. A rush of scents met the tide of travelers: sweet apples stacked in wicker baskets, the sharp tang of saltfish packed in ice, and the bitter undertone of coal smoke rising from the forges. Merchants called from their stalls, voices overlapping like a chorus, hawking spices, cookery, bolts of muslin and silk dyed in crimson, mint, and ivory, and leather gloves for the hands of pilots. Incense drifted lazily between the stalls, carried by the wind. Among the crowd, Aden, a gaunt young man, paused as Katerina, a farmer's daughter, watched him from behind her basket. Her braids were threaded with wildflowers, her eyes steady as she recognized the look of hunger on his face. It was the same look her family had worn before they found shelter in the village. Others passed her stall, coins clinking, but she held back her hand until he drew near. Only then did she press an apple into his palm, her fingers lingering just long enough for him to hear her quiet words. She whispered, "Na dobro," for good. He blinked, unsettled by the depth in her eyes, uncertain whether she offered blessing or bargain. She smiled briefly, knowing the unseen weight kindness could set in motion, then turned away. Aden nodded in thanks, slipped the apple into his pocket, and disappeared into the press of bodies. The tower. High above, the groan of rigging and the hiss of escaping steam signaled the arrival of another Zeppelin. Painted in blue and copper, the ship descended toward the seaport. Ropes were thrown down to the dock tower where workers scrambled to catch them. Boots clattered on the planks, shouts rose above the wind, and smoke rolled in waves as coal was loaded into the belly of the ship. The air itself seemed alive with motion, an orchestra of industry, ambition, and smoke. From a lofted office overlooking the docks, Alara leaned out of her wide window, letting the wind toss strands of blonde hair across her face. She recorded the ship's arrival in her ledger with brisk, deliberate strokes. Every tower, every docking fee, every outbound cargo, her father's fortune and the city's order depended on it. Her father, the town quartermaster, had once done this work himself. Now he passed the legacy to her, while keeping watch from his windowed perch above the harbor. From the tower's interior, the city's noise softened into a distant hum. Alara closed the ledger and rubbed her fingers, ink-stained and stiff. Noon bells rang from the lower districts, their tones drifting up through the open windows. Ships had departed or docked for the day, taking on provisions or unloading freight. Everything would be still now, until evening. "Come eat," her father said. Garrick Vale set plates of fish and vegetables on a narrow table by the window, pulling out a chair for her. "Fresh tomatoes," he added, nodding at the dish. "Katerina says they're the last of the season. Look at the size of them." Alara exhaled, numbers still ticking through her mind, and joined him, setting the ledger aside. 5 arrivals before noon, she said. 12 departing at dusk, if the winds hold. Garrick tore the bread cleanly, offering her the larger half without looking. "They always think the wind will hold." "You logged the crescent traffic?" "Yes." "And did you mark them honest?" he asked mildly. She hesitated. "I marked them as they declared themselves." A low chuckle escaped him. "Good answer. Clever. You always say that. And you always prove me right." His gaze drifted back to the docks. "They don't go for copper, Alara." "Not truly? Copper is what they tell their wives." "And the crescents?" she asked. Garrick chewed slowly. "The crescents are dangerous and take more than they give. They always have. I flew them before you were born. We all came back lighter in the hold and heavier in debt, those that made it back." She frowned. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to poison your thoughts about ambition, but trade works on a balance. If all you see is one side of the scale, you could be in deeper than you know with no way to right the measure." He met her gaze. "The wisdom is knowing when to count coin and when to count life." Alara followed his eyes to the streets below, where traders laughed and apprentices. This title is narrated with virtual voice, computer-generated narration for audiobooks. Airovale by Jeff Gray.